know the way they misrepresented him, the authorities, the Ottoman government, the Turkish government, the Prime Minister of Turkey, so misrepresented Baha'u'llah that he was a man of evil and that he was the god of the Persians. Sheikh Mahmud became very angry with the government of Turkey that they had sent such a man to Akka, the city that he was a religious leader of. And he wanted them to remove Baha'u'llah from this place because he said it will bring to us curse and unfortunate situations. But of course this was not possible. The edict of the Sultan was there that Baha'u'llah was condemned to life imprisonment in a solitary cell in Akka till the end of his life. So he decided, it was agitating, he was always agitating, he didn't know what to do. And eventually he decided that he said he must go and assassinate Baha'u'llah. He planned to assassinate him. And one day he came outside the barracks, he hid a dagger under his cloak. And as I said, he was a very strong man. He said he will himself do this. And he came outside the barracks. And he said to the guards that he wanted to see Baha'u'llah. Sheikh Afandi, as they call him, Sheikh Afandi. Well, they said okay, because of course he was a man of authority and they would naturally let him in. But they said we must get permission from Baha'u'llah whether he will see you or not. You see, already Baha'u'llah had established such an ascendancy, yes. Nobody would ever enter his presence without his permission. You have heard that he would not visit the governor of Akka. For 5 years, one of the governors of Akka was begging, when Baha'u'llah was outside the barracks, was begging to be allowed to come into the presence of Baha'u'llah, and he would not be allowed. He said he can see Abdul Baha. And it went on and on. He begged so much. He was not pleased with him, with that governor, and he would not see him. Eventually, the Turkish authorities required the governor to see Baha'u'llah to go and give them some report. And in that case, Baha'u'llah said, okay, he can come in. And he came with a European general, who we are told he was a stout man. But we haven't been able to find out who it was, this general. However, Abdul Baha mentions this. He came into the presence of Baha'u'llah, and Baha'u'llah showed them seats to come in and be seated. But as soon as they saw the imposing person of Baha'u'llah, his personality and his majesty, they were so awed at that majesty that both of them, he and the European general, couldn't come any further than the threshold of the room. And they both sat down on the floor. And no matter how much Baha'u'llah showed him, please sit down in here, they didn't. They just they bowed their heads before him. And they said nothing. They just sat there. And Baha'u'llah was speaking, and after 10 minutes they asked permission to go. And they got up and they went away. Now, this is the majesty, which I was talking about. So now here, they said we must, Sheikh Mahmud said he wanted to go and see Baha'u'llah, and they said, the guards said, now we must ask him. When they went to Baha'u'llah, he said, tell him to take away the weapons he has got with him, and then he can come up. When this message was brought down to him, he was so astonished, because he didn't know how they knew it. He thought maybe somebody had seen the weapons and had reported to him. But he was so puzzled, and he couldn't stay. He decided, he was puzzled, and he went away. But he couldn't rest. He couldn't rest. He was agitating and agitating, until one day he decided, he said, I don't need any tools. I'm a strong man. I can go with my own hands and take his life. So again he came at the gates. And again he asked to see Baha'u'llah. And again the guard said, we will have to ask Baha'u'llah permission. And when they asked him, he just said 3 words in Arabic to him. He said, tell him, Tahir qalbik, means tell him to purify his heart and then come up and see me. That was another message which shook him so much that he was so much upset, and he went back again. And then in the town he met Abdul Baha, because in those days, although they were in the barracks, but some of the believers were allowed every day to come out of the barracks to buy provisions, and Abdul Baha often would go out with them, and he would go into the mosque. And that was the beginning, by the way, of the people of Akka coming in contact with this magnetic personality of Abdul Baha. And that is how their enmity gradually turned towards friendship, and eventually they all became attracted to him. And as you know, eventually Abdul Baha, you can really describe him during Baha'u'llah's ministry and afterwards as the governor of Akka, the master of Akka. He was definitely the one who was, every governor who came afterwards, he would come and get instructions from Abdul Baha. And if he was unfriendly, he couldn't stay there, really and truly. Both God and both other things would remove him. That man would be removed. That governor would be removed. This is how the faith grew afterwards. And Abdul Baha, as you all have heard the stories of Abdul Baha in Akka, I'm not going to go into that. But now, he saw Abdul Baha in the mosque, Sheikh Mahmud. He became very angry with him that he had come into the mosque. He went to him. He held Abdul Baha's shawl, which usually was tied around, people used to tie around their waist, and shook him very hard. And said to him, are you the one who say, are you calling yourself the son of God? Abdul Baha said, you said it. That was his answer. He said, you said that. And then with his warmth and magnetism, he won his heart, really. And Sheikh Mahmud just settled down a little. And after settling down, soon afterwards, in the course of other meetings with Abdul Baha, he became attracted to him. And never he remembered that dream of his forefather, of that man. He never remembered. He never could think that it could be this person, this prisoner, because Baha'u'llah was so misrepresented as being a man of evil. He would never think that this would be the one that his grandfather, that man in the old days had reminded him of it. He would never think of it. And so, after some times that he met the master invited him, now come and see Baha'u'llah. And then he went and saw Baha'u'llah. And he said, as soon as he opened the door in the barracks, when Baha'u'llah was in the prison, he saw him. As soon as he saw him, Baha'u'llah, with a very authoritative voice, told him, have you forgotten what the religious leader of your father told you about our coming here? Now, as soon as he saw the majesty and the authority of this word, and remembering the whole thing flashed back to him, he immediately prostrated himself at the feet of Baha'u'llah and became one of the most ardent believers. And he also, his family also, or all, became devoted to the faith. It was this Sheikh Mahmud who afterwards began to help the believers to come into the barracks and visit Baha'u'llah. Because in those days, as you know, 2 of the followers of Mirza Yahya, that is Baha'u'llah's half-brother, who was great enemy, the breaker of the covenant of the Bab. 2 of the followers, one of them that evil man called Sayyid Muhammad, and another man, the 2 of them were housed in a little room above the city gates to watch out for anybody whom they could know, because they knew all the disciples and the followers of Baha'u'llah in those days in Persia, that if any of them are coming into the city of Akka, even in disguise, because they mostly would disguise themselves as Arabs. They couldn't come in just in ordinary clothes that they were wearing. In spite of that, he would recognize them, report them to the authorities, and then they would be expelled from the city of Akka. This was the strict. Now, so it was very difficult for people to come in. Nabil tried, and he came in and he was recognized by these men, and he was reported and sent out of the city. And so were others. But at this time, Sheikh Mahmud became a very great helper. And what he used to do was this: when the friends wanted to come in, when the believers wanted to come into the city of Akka, they were usually in Haifa and outside Akka, he would make a date for them. He would go outside, and then he would bring them back, he would bring them with him in the evening as carrying a lantern for him. In those days, when a person went out, it was an important person, always a servant carried a lantern in front of him, because there was no public lighting. We used to, it was in my days the same. When I was a young boy, as a young boy, I always carried a lantern for my father, for instance. It was one of those duties you carried out for your father. It is also a sign of respect, always to walk in front of somebody respectable in front of him, carrying a lantern for him. Now, he used to carry these believers, he would bring these believers in as if they were carrying lanterns for him, his servants, and then the next night he would take them out in the same way. And sometimes he even arranged for ropes to pull people up from the walls of Akka, but it failed. That trick never worked. So then this Sheikh Mahmud became a great helper in that way. And when the purest branch died, we know he fell down from the roof. He begged Baha'u'llah to allow him to be the one who would wash his body before being put in this grave, because washing the body was one of those customs of Islam. And there are people whose job is to wash the dead. And he said, please do not allow them to come in. I want to do it myself, with my own hands. So you see how God works in that way. Now that I'm talking about this, are you getting very tired? Really? Now, be honest. All right, well, I'll tell you one or two little ones, and then you can go home. One of the believers who came, in those days when Baha'u'llah first came to the barracks of Akka, it was very difficult for anybody to get in the city. As I said, Nabil could not get into the city of Akka at the time. But Baha'u'llah at one stage, in the early stages, wanted someone to come into the barracks, inside the barracks, so that he could give him some of the tablets and as a bounty also to one of the believers. And this is what happened. This is the story. There was a man in Persia, in the district of Khurasan, who was a great enemy of the faith. And one day this man went to the clergyman and he said to him, what are we going to do about the Baha'is? They are increasing in their numbers. They are all the time teaching this faith, and more people become Baha'is. What is our duty? And this man said, your duty is to go and kill them, take their lives. If in this process you succeeded to kill them, you will go to paradise. And even if you were killed yourself in that struggle, you still will go to paradise. You're not going to lose. So this man became very excited about this prospect, and he carried some daggers and some weapons with him, and went and saw one of the very active Baha'is of that time. He went there and he said, now I have come to take your life. That's my job, my duty. And what are you going to say? Well, this man, of course, was very unruffled, and he began to talk to him, and he said, okay, you can carry this out, but why don't you come and hear and say what we say, and then you can take my life. Come and hear it. You haven't heard anything. And the way he told him, this man agreed. He said, okay, that's a good deal. I'll come. And so they arranged a meeting. Actually, this meeting was held in the house of the sister of the Mullah Hussein. And he said he went there, and the believers began to talk to him about the faith, and he was carried away with it. Hour after hour, he came more and more excited, and he stayed for the whole night until the sun came out. And then he came the next day, and after 2 days, he became a fully fledged Baha'i, full of fire and excitement, the faith. And he said to these people, are you sitting in here, Baha'u'llah, in Akka? He said, I can't sit in here. If Baha'u'llah is in Akka, I want to go and see him. He is my Lord. I must go and see him. So he went to his wife and family, and he said, I'm going for a long journey. And he went on, started a journey on his foot, and after some months he arrived in Akka. And when he arrived in Akka, you know, Baha'u'llah, before he went to Akka, just a few months before he went to Akka, before from Adrianople, before he went to Akka, he sent one of the believers. He told Abdul Baha to send one of the believers to the city of Akka and tell him to open up a shop. And this believer didn't know of all the places to go to Akka and open up a shop, so he did. And it wasn't until Baha'u'llah, about 6 months later, arrived as a prisoner, that he realized why Baha'u'llah has chosen him there, so that he could become a channel of communication and a person who can relay the news outside. And so he kept his identity with great wisdom, as a person, as if he didn't know any of the Baha'is or had nothing to do with them, but he was in touch with them. And all those who came to Akka, they all went to his shop, and it was he who would show them where the barracks was, and where Baha'u'llah was, and where his room was. And so this man eventually arrived there and went to see this man, and he showed him what to do. And so this man went in front of the barracks, waiting for the hand of Baha'u'llah to wave to him. This was how the believers would be just coming and standing in front of the barracks, satisfied with the wave of the hand of Baha'u'llah. But this man, when he stood there, he saw the hand of Baha'u'llah is not waving to him, but is beckoning him to come in. At first he was doubtful, and then he saw that Baha'u'llah is persisting. Come in. He said, okay, if you say so, I will go in. And he went in, he went beside now the guards are all standing at the gates. But he said as he went close to the guards wouldn't move their eyelids. They just were standing stationary, wouldn't even look at him. They didn't, as if they didn't see him. He just passed by them and went through the barracks and went up there, found the room of Baha'u'llah, and went into his presence. And he stayed there for 2 days. And Baha'u'llah told him this, and later on he revealed in a tablet. We have his tablet. He says, as a bounty on our part, we made the eyes of the guards to go blind for a short period of time, so that you can come up and attain our presence. And then he gave him a new name. And then he gave him some of his tablets. And he said, take them to Persia. And he assured him that he can go out of the barracks again without being noticed. And the same way he comes out, he says the guards were absolutely motionless in their eyes. They didn't see. In his tablet he says, we made the eyes of the guards to go blind for a short while until you pass them by. Here we are. This is, if God wants to do something, he'll do it. And so then he goes out. He comes all the journey to Iraq, eventually comes to Baghdad. Now, as I told you, in every town, if they know that you are a traveler, they'll search you. And he had this parcel of the tablets with him, protected him all the way. Somehow he protected it, and nobody noticed anything until he arrived in Baghdad. Now he arrived in Baghdad at the time that all the believers of Baghdad, practically all of them, had been sent a few months before on exile to Mosul. This was another move which the authorities did, so that there was nobody amongst the friends. He did not know any Baha'i in town. So he was walking in the bazaar, and as he was walking in the bazaar, he suddenly spotted the guards coming towards him. The guards had seen this man look stranger. They wanted to see who he was. And he knew that this parcel of tablets is in danger now, and his life is in danger. He had no choice. He just turned his heart to Baha'u'llah for protection. And the only thing that he could think of, now you know in a bazaar there is shop after shop after shop, all the shops are stuck together. And as he happened to be in front of this shop, he could do nothing else but to throw this parcel quickly into the shop. And he went forward to the guards. The guards took them to the police station. And they searched him and they found that there was nothing wrong with him. And they let him go. So then, with a great deal of trepidation and fear, he comes back to the bazaar. Knowing now this man, whoever owned the shop, has found what the parcel is, and probably he has reported him to the police already, or will report him, or there's going to be trouble. Well, he came in and he walked a couple of times in front of the shop, backwards and forwards, very sheepishly, not knowing what to do. And then he saw the shopkeeper is beckoning him in. Come inside, he said. Well, he went in. And the shopkeeper took him out in the back door, in the back of the shop. And he threw his arms around him and he said, Allahu Abha. He was the only Baha'i in Baghdad at the time. You see now? The only Baha'i. And he said, I stayed in his house for several days. And so much he talks about the great joy that he had spending in Baghdad, being the only native believer who was living in Baghdad at the time. So you see, these friends, these believers at the time of Baha'u'llah, their lives were connected with him. It's what I was saying today to you. Not until we are connected with him can things happen. And they had 100% faith. And so all these things happen. To the extent that you have faith, to that extent your powers and blessings will be. This is what Abdul Baha says. And faith is a relative term. And we have to try. And all the points we were saying this weekend was based on this, that our faith must become 100%. We must allow it to become 100%, to reach the stage of certitude, which is certitude is above faith. Certitude. And then one becomes filled with great powers. And these early believers had these powers. I was telling the other day that when you saw these great disciples of Baha'u'llah, the impression you got, the impression was that of giants, tremendous giants, mountains of power and steadfastness. They had really, I have seen with my own eyes the stories of they had some of them who had really reached to that summit of faith. They had powers of life and death in their hands. Now if I tell you some of these things, I hope you won't misunderstand it. But I have seen it happening with my own eyes. You see, in Persia, there came a time that the faith reached the point that there was a time of confrontation. Not necessarily on the confrontation for fighting, I'm not saying that, but confrontation to establish the ascendancy and the truth of the faith. You could see the Baha'i community on one side and the Muslim community on the other. And they would come to confront each other. to confront each other to see whether this cause is right. And of course they came to prove it wasn't right. It wasn't the truth. And the believers had to prove it. And this was their greatest task in public. I remember taking part in meetings where clergymen would come in, representing a great congregation of people, bringing with them a great number of their followers. And the Baha'is are sitting on this room, and they would come along in great numbers. And no one in that gathering would have the right to say any word. They would make it very clear. Only two people. One was the clergyman, or one of the clergymen, and one was a Baha'i teacher. And this was a stage of real confrontation. And the discussion was not something which would be, as we teach the faith here, with wisdom, and as I said this morning to you, how we should be tactful and wisdom. No, this was a question of confrontation, of establishing the ascendancy of the faith. Is this right or is this wrong? Because they had no doubt what the claims were. And the questions were like this. They would sit down. The Baha'i teacher would be sitting quiet and silent. And then they would tell him, well, to the Baha'i teacher, well, begin, say something. The Baha'i teacher said, I have nothing to say. You have to ask a question. We say God has manifested himself. It is your duty to ask a question, not for me to tell you. You have to ask. You see, this is how they started. It was like a battlefield. You have heard the story of the old days, how two men riding on horses and having these spears, and they would have a battle, and everybody was a spectator. This was exactly what was happening. And even sometimes I took part in many such meetings where the non-Baha'i side and they would insist we want to have somebody to write down everything we say. And so they would appoint a secretary and we would appoint a secretary. And then each one had to initial these statements. And then the question comes. He has to ask a question. By what proof, and this is always this question, by what proof the Bab is a manifestation of God? Now, if you answer him and say by this proof and this proof and that proof, he's going to reject it. You have to be very tactful and see what to say. You must not say what the proof is, because anything you say, he's going to reject it. So they would say, Muhammad says all the manifestations of God are the same. By whatever proof you recognize Muhammad, with the same proof, we prove to you the authenticity of the message of the Bab. You tell me what is the proof of Muhammad's revelation. Now the ball is in his headquarters. And then he would say, well, he could be dependent on who he was. If he was not experienced, he would quickly give in. And anything he said, that would be the end. He would be immediately cornered and finished with. And that would end up in an obvious defeat. It was a question of either defeating or not defeating. And sometimes the man was clever enough, he knew he must not say anything. He would say, no, you must say it independent of this. And then the Baha'i teacher would say, not until you recognize Muhammad as a manifestation of God can you ever recognize the Bab. Tell me how did you recognize him? Not until you recognize him. Now he would say, well, I am a Muslim. Yes, he would say, you are a Muslim. He says there are two types of Muslims. One were those who were killed during the time of Imam Hussein, and one were those who killed. Which one of them are you? And so on and so forth. This would go on, and sometime maybe for 2 hours this discussion would go on like a football. It would backwards and forwards. And the Baha'i teacher would not give in. I remember once these gatherings when my father was discussing this with these clergymen. Eventually they turned to him, the Baha'is, and they said, please, this is enough. You tell this clergyman the proof of Muhammad's authenticity, because he's supposed to. Well, he said, I am willing to tell him when he confesses that he is unable to prove the authenticity of the message of Muhammad. Yes, this was very serious. You see, it was a confrontation. And this went on and on. Somebody came up, and eventually, I remember in one of these gatherings, there were 2 or 3 clergymen, and one of them had the right to talk. Then the second one, having seen all this backwards and forwards going, he came up at the end. He said, look, please, talk with me this time. No, unless this person says he's unable to continue conversation and discussion, we are not going to talk to you. Please talk to me, he said. Please talk to me. Eventually, everybody said, okay, please talk to him now. Let him talk. Right. Now he says this time, he says to my father, he says, look, you say that I should prove the authenticity of the message of Muhammad. I don't believe in God, and I don't believe in Muhammad, and I am not educated at all. I can't read or write. You prove to me. So now, having said this, and all his congregation are hearing it, he would turn to all the congregation, the Baha'i, this is my father, he turned to all this congregation, and he said, I'm afraid your leader is telling lies and truths together. When he says he doesn't believe in God and in Muhammad, he's really telling the truth. But when he says he's not able to read or write, he's lying. You see? Now such confrontations, you can imagine, it become very heated. It could become very heated. And then, in the middle of it, there is a power of life and death. I don't know why he said it. He himself said, I don't know why I said it, but he got up, my father got up. He said, now I want you all to hear me. This man who has said these things will not last more than a certain amount of time he gave, 3 months. If he did live beyond 3 months, then you can take it that this faith is not the faith of God. Now you see, you can see what a challenge? Power of life and death. Oh, people said, no, don't say these things. Forgive him. No, this is what I said, he said. About a month later, this man was traveling in the middle of the desert, and he was frozen to death. The news came, and as a result of it, 20 or 30 people who were there present, they came into us. They almost knelt in front of him, and they began to cry, and they said, this cause is true. This is the cause of God. Now you see, this wasn't the first time he had done it. Some of the teachers, they had this power. Many times he had done this, and others had done this also. Power of life and death was in their hands, the early believers. I hadn't said this story to many people because people could misunderstand this, but this is how it is. They defended the cause of God, and it was a serious thing, this confrontation, as I call it, between the Baha'is and the Muslims. And so during this period of 80 years, 90 years, or 100 years, the real essence of that nation was extracted. Anyone who had qualities really entered the cause of God. And now their destiny is to bear all these persecutions and sufferings. Shoghi Effendi had told them, you must not think that what is going on in Persia now, with all this persecution that is going on, that these things are haphazard and accidental. On the contrary, Shoghi Effendi has foreshadowed very clearly, as if he's sitting in the next room in Persian. He has told the Persian believers, as if he's sitting in the next room now and telling us what is happening step by step. He has told us how revolutions will come. He has told us how the sufferings and the persecutions will intensify. He has said how the believers will be attacked from 6 directions. They will be closed in, which means they cannot get out. And he says, when these things happen, and it must happen, it says it will produce 2 results. 2 things will happen together. And these things have not happened yet. One of these things we are not at all interested in. We are not going to talk, we are not going to at all focus attention on. And that is, he says, the enemies will destroy themselves completely. We are not interested in that. Because we are not to be the ill wishers of our enemies. This is a very important point. We must not go around and wish them bad things, because they are ignorant. When we were children and we were persecuted all the time, we were told by Baha'i teachers that when you see these people persecute you, hit you and curse you and do all kinds of things, you must never hate them. You must never want in your heart to revenge, because they are ignorant. And Abdul Baha says the greatest punishment for an ignorant person is his ignorance. You realize this? This is a very profound statement. Their ignorance. So we are not interested in that they are going to destroy themselves. They will. And then along with it, he says, Shoghi Effendi says, he says the faith of God will so emerge victorious that all his followers will be astonished, and that it will eventually lead to world recognition of the faith. Because not until the faith is emancipated in Persia will the faith really become recognized in the world as a leading world religion. It is there that it must be emancipated, recognized as an independent religion. Up to now, the Muslims, they are denying it in Persia. They even say, oh no, they are nothing, they are a sect of Islam. See? And not until the faith is emancipated and recognized fully and officially will the faith throughout the world get the status of world religion in a real sense. Because nowadays, wherever we go in the West and we say this is a world religion, well, even the editors and the reporters and the media are not against us, but they cannot imagine it as a world religion. They still call it a sect sometimes. It's because in their mentality there are only a few world religions. And the faith of Baha'u'llah has not, in their mind, has not yet reached the point that they can recognize it as a world religion, so that when they say what are the world religions, everybody would say there is the Jewish, there is the Christian, there is the Muslim, and there is the Baha'i. But at the moment, we have not reached to that stage. And this will not happen until the faith is fully emancipated in Persia. So friends, there is a great deal, great things that must happen. But I feel one thing I wanted to say it, and then we'll finish because we have to close the hall. When we were in Haifa, at the time of the election of the House of Justice, and when the elections were finished and the members of the NSAs returned back, we had a conference, 5-day conference with the members of the House of Justice and the hands of the cause. And it was in these gatherings that really it became clear to me that this persecution of the Baha'is of Iran has now released such forces in the world, spiritual forces, that we do not really employ it enough. We employ it for this proclamation business, yes, but we have not utilized it for teaching and bringing great numbers into the faith through the influences of these forces which are released. These forces are released in great profusion. And if we do the right things which we have been discussing in this weekend, and I hope that what we have said this weekend will be of some help, those points that we enumerated, that we should arise and bear in mind that the forces are released today for bringing great numbers into the faith. And I hope this country, which has been once leading the world, in fact, I remember that hearing it several times, bringing great numbers into the faith, that we will begin again with yet another intensive, dedicated action on behalf of everybody. Do you remember that 1 hour a day that I mentioned today? And you can increase it by many more. By that, by intensifying our universal participation of personal teaching, we would go forward in this country to bring about soon a day that we can say we have a Baha'i state. Why not here? And not until you have your aims. And believe you me, the powers of Baha'u'llah, the powers of earth and heaven are with you. Provided we do the right things that we were saying. You remember I was saying forget everything I said, but remember a few points? Now those few points, if we remember them and if we put them into practice, tremendous things will happen here. And then we should follow the guidance of your National Assembly and really rally around them. They are the generals of this army, and go forward. And I'm sure you bring great victories for the faith in this country, and then it will reverberate throughout the world. I love the indigenous people of this country, really and truly, of those that I have seen. And you are very privileged to be positioned in a place like this. So let us not lose them to materialism, because materialism is opening up and bringing up, and they're going to swallow them. And I think time is short. So friends, let's just get back to your homes. You have to go to bed. Thank you very much. Have a talk.